All right, our next interview was Doc Waterfall. Doc's been in Willie County for many years, and we'll let him tell us about that. But he's been our veterinarian for many years. He's been to many of our farms and helped us out during the tough times when we had sick animals. So we're going to turn this over to Doc and let him tell us a little bit on himself and his life history and some of the interesting things that happened to him as he did his veterinary work. So it's all yours, Doc.
Well, I was born in Columbus City, and my father was teaching shop at the high school at that time. Miss Howell and Gilchrist, that had the grip store in Columbus City for years, was superintendent. Oh, and she got in a fight with the man who was president of the school board. And the teachers all took sides, one or another. And if you took the wrong side, you were out of a job when it ended up. And the wrong side was with the president of the school board. And my dad got fired because he backed Miss Howell. And to have a job at that time, we moved to Fort Wayne. And my dad worked for the Dudlow Company, which was a manufacturing company, for a number of years until the Depression hit. And I was only 3 years old when we moved to Fort, so I moved out of Columbus City. But I had my mother's family lived beside the Presbyterian church downtown, and my uncle, her brother, was a veterinarian. Her father was a veterinarian, so I'm a third generation veterinarian. Graduated from Michigan State, and I heard Mr. Holycross say that he graduated from high school in '37. So I knew he was older than I was because I graduated from high school, Northside High School in Fort Wayne, in '39, and started to veterinary school the next year. I applied at several veterinary schools, Penn State, and there weren't a number of veterinary schools at that time there are now. But I was not encouraged to go to any school, and Michigan State's, you make the grades and you get to stay. In other words, there was no build up to that. So I went to Michigan State, and I like to say chemistry was a weeder course at Michigan State, and there were a group of us that went over into the center of Lansing, or East Lansing, to the People's Church. People's Church was an interdenominational church, and there were about 6 or 7 of we veterinary students that every Sunday morning sat on the first row of the balcony of that church. And the week before that, I had a counselor who happened to be a chemistry teacher too, and he said to me that week in my visit with him, but you better change courses. You're never going to make it. Well, you can imagine what that does to you. It stimulated me, actually, I guess. But that morning, as the service ended, the boys left to go to their various dormitories or wherever they lived. And I said, well, I'm going to stay here just a little while. And they all left. And I said, God, if you want me to be a veterinarian, you help me. And he did. He did. He helped me. And I give the credit there of what happened in the front row of the balcony of the People's Church. I had worried myself sick because that's all I wanted to be, and naturally. And I had worried myself sick, and when I walked out of that church that day, I left it up to somebody else. And let me tell you, I got better at my lessons and everything else because I stopped worrying. That's it, So I'm giving a little testimony here. That was a big help to me. So anyway, that at that time, that was a 7-year course, and I think it's 8 years now. I'm not too sure what it is, and of course Purdue did not have a veterinary school at that time. It come on later, and all my friends later on and my partners in practice and everything were Purdue graduates. So I was a Michigan Stater, and so Dr. Quinn that's in the office now is a Purdue graduate too, and she actually took the practice over from Dr. Ritchie, who came and joined me after Dr. Coble left, which Coble was my first partner was an Ohio State man, and he was from Huntington originally, and he of course, we had our differences between Ohio State and Michigan State, still do, and I became well acquainted with, and at that time they accepted only 3 Indiana students. And one of them was a man by the name of Drudge that lived up at can't think of the town, but and then there was a Dr. Main from Huntington, and Bob Main, and so there were just the 3 Indiana students there at that time. And Purdue University had made an agreement. They would accept, if you accept 3 students, we'll accept 3 engineering students, because Purdue had an engineering school at that time, but they didn't have a veterinary school. So they traded off. If you take 3 of our students, we'll take 3 of yours who want engineering degrees, and that's what happened on that thing. I had 1 year to go, and of course you studied many hours, and you studied in the library. And I come out of the library one Sunday afternoon, and here were groups of students all standing around. What's going on? Well, haven't you heard? You must be the only one on the campus that don't know that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and all at once there was come by a older man with a speaker system, and he says, your president of the college will have a conference tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, and don't do anything to win. But there were several boys that immediately left and went to Canada because they could get in the Air Force in Canada. And then at that meeting that day, they say, you talk to your draft board. If your draft board is going to take you, you better join the ROTC and so you can finish your college. And I went to my draft board in Fort Wayne, and they said, "You'll be going in 3 weeks." So I went back, and Michigan State had a train over on the siding where they dumped the coal and thing for the university. And they loaded us up the next day, and they took us to the Grand Rapids. There was a post, Army post at Grand Rapids. It seems like I always got the breaks because most all the college kids that come in there was put on KP right away, and KP lasted till all night long. And then if the sergeant got mad at you, you may be all next day too. Well, I so happened that I got put with a guy who had been sergeant 4 or 5 times and knocked back down because he was always in trouble with service. And we were put on guard duty. Those are all wooden buildings up there. And you had to walk all night long and check in certain places to watch for fire. And then I didn't have to do KP. And this kid, he knew the tricks of everything. And so that we went in at the very first that breakfast was served, the mess hall, the first group. And one day we were in there. There were 12 at a table. They gave you cereal, and the cereal, you had to have milk, of course, for cereal, but there was just 2 quarts of milk sitting on a table for 12. Well, we're just about 10 or 12 tables being used, and the rest all had milk on them. So we went back and helped ourselves. And the mess sergeant come out. He called us names that I can't repeat here, and he says he started at the front, and every table that had extra bottles on, they had to go back on KP. And this sergeant, the ex-sergeant that I was with, he immediately says, "Put them on the floor, put them on the floor." We put them all, we just had 2 bottles. When he come to us, now he says, "When we walk out of here, you walk like nothing happened, don't anything." And he says, "When we get outside, we'll run like hell to the barracks and go to bed." Well, so having my veterinary buddies that had gone up with me, my closest friend couldn't call that sergeant enough names. Little Tojo and everything, and all the way back on the train, all he could say was that names. But I was fortunate to have an old hand at it with me, and the officer of the day had to check on us that we signed in to the various places as we walked during the night, and we had that showed that we were there. We had to time it, and he says, "That's one thing we do." The old sergeant told me, and we signed in all the spots, and then we got to sleep in the days. We were up there 2 weeks, and the very first day we got up there, they lined us up for our vaccinations, and other soldiers that were not with our group had been there a day or two. They kept telling us, "Watch out for the P39. It's got a needle on it. Because that's what's going to, they tried to scare us, of course. And they kept yelling at us, and we got up toward getting our shots, and a boy right in front of me, he fainted, dropped right down. Well, I was going to pick him up, and the sergeant says, "Leave him away. He'll wake up. He'll wake up." And he did after a while. But I think there were 3 or 4 that fainted before they got their shots. And well, that was my experience going in. I went back to school for you went the year round then. We were on the not semester system, but the quarterly system, and you by going a year around, we cut 1 year down. See, I guess I had 2 years yet to go, and I got them both in. But of course, every Saturday we had had to parade for the college, and since I was, we had a cavalry up there, horses. If you didn't weigh over 150 pounds, you got in the cavalry. They didn't let anybody heavier than that ride the horses. But there were 60 some of us in the cavalry, and they only had 30 horses. So you marched you got every other parade, you got a horse. Otherwise you marched, and in front of and the officers that manned the ROTC you passed in review in front of them, and you got up to where their stand was, and eyes right, and you all had to turn right. And I broke out again, and I got to be the drill sergeant, and I got to lead the march. But then one day we went over to the field house, and that was all a dirt sand floor. You got your horse, and you had to jump him over. And every time I went over the jumps, I went off the horse. And finally, Captain Taylor, who was our captain, regular Army captain there, he come up to me and he asked my name. And he says, you got guts, son. I like it. Because you didn't stop trying to jump him, even though every time you flew off the horse and went in the sand, So, and another break, he knew me then. And I forgot to tell you one of the. Is this have any relative to what you're doing? I don't know. I'm the very first time we had a regular sergeant there and the captain. And the captain wants to talk to you, and he says, step in front of your horse, hold out the reins, and he gave us a talk. And he said, mount up. And we'd been back. What we didn't know was the sergeant went along and loosened and the saddles all went like this, when you went to get in. Then the horse started bucking, and you could ride that horse, Yeah. Well, those are some of the experiences. I was always fortunate to have a job in college. That's the way I went through. And the going rate was 40 cents an hour. If you worked for a lab, they were having an outbreak of Newcastle was season chickens about then, and we were doing a post. We got 40 cents an hour for that work. Then the next term, I heard there was a vacancy on the press to help print the weekly paper up there. And my job was to sit above the press, and if the paper broke, we would stop the press so it wouldn't get ink on the press on the plates. But I fell asleep a few times because that sometimes went all night. Nicest guy that was the press man. And first thing you know, I'd wake up and he'd be cleaning the plates. But I still got my 50 cents an hour. And I had classes the next day. And if the students that wrote the paper and everything, if they were slow, maybe we wouldn't get off work till 4 or 5 in the morning. But then there were times we got off at midnight too. And so at 50 cents an hour, that was big stuff, you know. And
well, tell us a little bit about your veterinary experience here in Whitley County. Tell us some of your interesting stories about.
Well, let me say, I of course had to go right in the Army right after I got out of college. My folks did not have a car at that time that was fit to drive, and so they couldn't come up to my graduation. It was at Christmas time doing the speed up thing, and I was the Army service, amazingly. The Army Veterinary Corps, which very few people know very much about, was part of the Quartermaster Corps. And every bit of food of animal origin that went to the Army had to be inspected by a veterinarian. And I was first sent up to Chicago, and we went to the various packing plants in Chicago and the egg plants and everything else to train us in what we were looking for. From there I was sent to Indianapolis. Here I live in Columbus City, Fort Wayne, and I'm stationed that close to home. But didn't have a car or anything at that time, and couldn't afford a car. And I got out of school. Surprisingly, I had borrowed money from my uncle that was a veterinarian, and I got out of school with a $19,000 debt, which was not very much at that time compared to what they have now, you see. And so I would, my Army pay, I paid them off with my Army pay. And then the first thing I did was Walt Miller had a filling station and a car company on the corner of Jackson and Main Street. That is now a restaurant, a little restaurant. Have you eaten in that restaurant yet?
No,
Well, it's the lady that worked at the cash register at oh shoot, what's the what?
Richards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She now works at that little restaurant because she retired.
Called
And
the Skillet, isn't it?
what?
It's called the Skillet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but where was I? Well, let's see. The war ended. I was in Terre Haute, working inspection lines at Terre Haute. And the thing that made the management mad at Terre Haute, at us really mad, was that they would have to, it was the rules that you had to smoke a ham and never let the smoke go off the ham for something like 3 days. you can imagine what the ham's like, smoked for 3 days. But then those were all hams going overseas. And if you found it, get up at night, I was 4-block walk to the packing plant from where my apartment was. And I'd go down maybe at 2 or 3 in the morning and find a smoke knot on the hams, and then I'd condemn them. They couldn't. I had to. That was my. And of course, what could they do with those hams? You know, they didn't. They had loss there. You know, and and all at once the war ends, and I'm going home, and I'm going to be able to practice veterinary medicine, and I, of course, had found a girl down there by that time that worked in a packing plant, and she said, well, you'll never come back. And I said, no, we'll get married before I go home. And we did. And Terre Haute's not the most favorable place to live. And she agreed to go live with my folks while I went overseas. So I was stationed overseas. And my first post was in Munich. And I don't know, I'm telling you a bunch of stuff you probably don't know, but as we had to ride a 6x6, we arrived in Frankfurt, and we had to ride an open 6x6 down from Frankfurt to Munich, which was a 2-day trip, and cold. There were 2 drivers, and there were 6 of us, and we took turns being the third one in the cab. Boy, it was cold. And got in there, and just at about 5:30 at night, and here come Patton walking down the steps with a couple colonels around him. And he stops all at once, and he points at us. We're on the other side of the steps. And he sends this colonel over to us. He had declared Eisenhower jackets. If you know what Eisenhower, they were short jackets. He had declared those as the uniform of the area. And he sent that colonel over to ask us why we had our dress. Why don't you men have the uniform on? We said, we just arrived. He goes back over and tells Patton. Patton sends them back over to us and says, the PX an officer, we were all lieutenants. They said, you have to buy your own things. And he says, the PX opens at 7:30 in the morning. By 8 o'clock, you better all be in uniform. We were. And, of course, we were there when Patton got injured and a few days later died. The Third Army was ahead of that area around Munich. Yes, we went to some of the trials that they were having it, and our job in Munich, my job in Munich, was to reestablish the German Veterinary Corps. And the German Veterinary Corps, you didn't dare use a Nazi. Well, everybody under 85 was Nazi. They had joined the Nazi party and everything. So all our men that we had to work with to establish had to be never belonged to the Nazi party, and they were all from 85 up. And so one day I don't know, I probably shouldn't tell you all these things. I know where. If you don't mind. All right, veterinary, when I left the service then, got came back to Great Lakes, was discharged from Great Lakes, but I had leave time coming. So I was up there in October, Great Lakes. My wife came to Chicago and met me, and then we come back down to Fort Wayne, and 3 days later I was in Columbia City, and my uncle had some physical problems, and he was ready to retire. And Dr. Coble, he had hired him as an associate. And so my first partner then was Coble. And let me say, I did most of the work. So Coble was too busy chasing. And so anyway, there was an apartment in the house, the big house there that was the side of the Presbyterian Church, and my aunt and uncle lived in the house, and my wife and I moved into that apartment upstairs, and more or less found that my uncle's health was such that he couldn't really ride with me, and you got to realize right now farming's changing so much. One of the things that they didn't have when I came back was rural electrification. So you didn't have the stainless steel tanks yet in the milk houses. You had milk cans. You know, the farmer had to fill the milk cans, and a driver come around and picked up the milk cans and took them into the dairy. Well, when rural electrification come along, it was so that it wasn't long till stainless steel tanks appeared in the milk houses, and they would come with a tank truck and pump the milk out of the tanks, you see. And that's rural electrification changed farming something more. When I come back from service, there were only 2 teams of horses left in Whitley County, and they were up by Etna. Everything else had gone to tractors. And what else changed? Well, when I got back there was a strike of automobiles at the time in the auto industry, and I couldn't buy a car. Finally, I bought a used car from Walt Miller down there on the corner, and that car was a Chevy. And I put 200,000 miles on that in Whitley County, a little bit up in DeKalb, and a little bit in Huntington County. And it was not unusual to drive 40, 50 miles to make a call. Dumb as I was, I charged the same to the man that lived 50 miles out as I did with the man that lived 5 miles out in making a call. That's why I'm so rich today. One of the big things that and often caused, well, 2 things with cows. One was a difficult birth. in which you maybe got a breech presentation coming, and some of those you work 3 and 4 hours, because I wasn't taught in school to do cesarean. I did my first cesarean some years later, and I never felt comfortable doing a cesarean. I went back up to school and took a short course on it, and I didn't think they did a very good job of teaching me. It didn't make me comfortable with them anyway. So sometimes when you would have to position a calf, maybe you had a leg forward or a breech presentation completely. You had to shove forward on the calf to straighten that leg up to get the calf out. And as I said, that would take you quite a while to do sometimes. And the second most complicated thing to do was the prolapse of the uterus, in which the uterus had turned the wrong side out, and you had to strip down to your waist and manually put that back in and against the straining of the cow, you know. And not only that, she might be down in a doorway with the wind blowing in and 8 degrees below zero. So that wasn't the most pleasant job you had at the time. One of the places where I considered I shined was that I have a real small hand, and I could deliver pigs like nobody else could deliver pigs. And the Johnson brothers out there, I did their veterinary work, and my job mainly was delivering sows that couldn't have their pigs. And so that was another. Now, the veterinarian that does their work out there lives in Wabash, and they hire him to come up twice a year, and he sells them the medicines and the shots and everything else. And we wouldn't have thought of doing that. That's why we've been living, you know. And the Johnson, Lynn, they come into church all the time, the Johnsons do. And and I have a son that lives out there by the Johnsons on the old, with the Diesel Bomb Road out there. What else do you want to know? Well, I'll tell you.
Tell about your family. I think you have 2 sons, is that right?
Yeah, my wife, of course, when we moved up to Columbus City, we had an awful time trying to get kids. And finally, she became pregnant, and she went into labor on her way to Fort Wayne, and we finally made it in, and that was the first son, and then 14 months later I had the second son, and that was the 2 children. And the older son went to Taylor University, and Taylor, at that time, he didn't know what he wanted to do. And I needed a new cattle chute about that time that I could run cattle through for pregnancy exams. That was another thing we got into, determining pregnancy in cattle. And you did that through a rectal exam, you know. But about that time we got sleeves, rubber sleeves. At first were rubber, then they were plastic. And that made it a more pleasant job than the one before. As had to go down by near Purdue to get a new cattle chute. So Kim called one night and said, "Dad, I've decided what I want to do." That's my oldest son. I said, "Well, don't tell me. You can tell me tomorrow. We're coming down that way and we'll take you out to the restaurant there in town to eat." Well, he told me that as we sat down to eat, "I've decided to be a veterinarian." "You what?" "I decided to be a veterinarian." "Well," I said, "you never liked to go with Dad?" "And you had to go with Dad when Mom had a church meeting or something at night? And you and Mark and you one time saw me put a uterus back in and I was bloody from one end and mother, I'll never do that." He said, you know. And I said, "If you're going into medicine, go into human medicine." And that's what he did. And of course, he got into IU medical school then. And here he is, 72, and he's still practicing medicine for a lady at Coshocton, Ohio. Coshocton was a canal town, and canal went down through there. And my great-granddaughter, who is there, is she goes to a girls' school, a 108-year girls' school in Columbus, Ohio. And every year they take a field trip to ride the barge down there, horses pulling them and everything. But that type of medicine, you're hired by a company, and they find you a position that the doctor that hires you pays, and then you have to pay them. They have to pay that company so much for it too. And every year he's going to quit, we have a cabin out in Montana, and they've been going out there for several years now, and it's at Big Timber, Montana. And I went out up till last year was the first year I haven't gone out, but I got too much of a trip out there. That's we drive out, we take 2 days, and then we rode the plane out a few times, and we get stuck in Denver for long hours until we get back on the plane again. I wore my military cap, services in World War II, and Kim and I would try to play cribbage in Denver waiting, and everybody, "Thank you for your service, thank you for your service, thank you for your service." And then one of the finest, happiest times we got was taking the honors flight from Fort Wayne to Washington. And the other, here a while back, they had a program on the Washington Mall, and the man kept saying, "Well, you have seen the monuments on the Washington Mall." And when we were there on the honor flight, we had a lady from out at Arlington, and she said, "Well, as we were riding back the bus to the airport, how many monuments did you see today?" And we're all thinking, World War II and all. She says, "Well, that was a trick question because you only saw one monument. There's only one monument on the mall. That's the Washington Mall. All the others are memorials." And that man gave us the program. I wrote him a note. I said, yeah, I'm sorry, but you made the same mistake that I made. There's only one monument on the wall. And at the time we were out there on the flight, it had suffered damage from an earthquake, and we couldn't go up in it. But since then it's open. But so what else about in practice? Well,
We had another son that you had mentioned. You had Kim and Mark. Does Mark still live around here?
Mark lives over on the Dealbaum Road, about 8 miles out from Columbus City.
Isn't that close to the historical site there where the Indians came through?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dealbaum had, he brought the Indians there. Dealbaum was, past my time here, what he went on through, I think it was Jago.
Yeah.
Is he next? Yeah, yeah.
Well, if you want to tell us any more about your veterinary practice, any interesting events there?
Well, I was probably 8 or 9, and Dr. Dempsey was practicing in Huntington. And he was a good friend of my uncle. And one Sunday, there was a lady lived just outside of town there, the brick house out there on 5 going in, I think. And she had cattle and goats. And she wore 8 petticoats. Now, how do I know she wore 8? Well, one Sunday, they couldn't get Dr. Dempsey, and they called my uncle down there, and I was probably 8 or 9. And her goats were all around there as we had to walk through the barnyard on out to the pasture where the cow was down, and treated the cow and come back in. Oh, she says, I want to show you my nice goats. Well, there was one stood away, kind of away from the barn there, and she had us stand there to milk goats on, and as she took her straw hat off, she bent over a grain bin that was over the hangover of the barn, to get some oats out, to get oats. Well, this guy that had been standing out happened to be a male, and when she presented the target, wham, he hit her and drove her head right down into the oats. She come out spitting oats, and she cussed like a trooper. Well, I'm 8, 9 years old now. I'd heard men cuss before, but I'd never heard a woman cuss before. And I was really got, and as soon as she knew that she was all right, that's the way I knew that she had 8 petticoats on, you see. And as soon as my uncle found out she wasn't hurt, why, he began to laugh. And he leaned against the post, and that made her cuss. She, you bet blanket, but you're never coming out here again. Oh, she was mad. And so that was one of the, another interesting, I got a lot of interesting stories, but one of the stories was, I got out about 3:30 in the morning, and here's a woman starting a big iron pot with fire under it at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the farmer was standing over by the door of the barn. And he says, I have a cow down here. So I went toward him, but then I said to him, what's your wife doing at this hour of the morning? Well, he says, I thought I heard a fox in the hen house. And he says, I grabbed my shotgun, and my Dog always goes every place I go. Now, I wear nightgowns. I don't wear pajamas, he says. And as we come up to the door of the hen house, I bent over to open it, and the dog didn't stop. He ran his cold nose right up my nightgown, and my gun went off. She's out here to clean 28 birds that I shot their heads off right down there. He says, but don't you ever tell that story. He says, I'll be the lap of the neighborhood and everything else. I told you with the idea that you would not tell. Well, he's gone now, so I can...
Well, thank you, Doc. I sure appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And, we thank you for...
One more thing that about, if I have the time, one more thing. One night about after midnight, we got a call out by Etna, and as we went up the lane, we saw a wagon coming to us, and it had 2 lanterns on it. And by the time he was coming down the lane, it snowed, and he was coming down the lane to get us, and the farmer was, and here those weren't lanterns. There was a dog sitting on the wagon, and his reflection from his eyes looked like 2 lanterns. And that was before they had electricity in the home. Good enough.
All right, very good. Well, thank you very much, Doc. Appreciate it.
Well, I don't know as I helped you. I had more stories to tell.